One of the fights that I'm most interested in seeing for 2026 has to be a fight between Brian Norman Sr. and Greg Hackett. I feel like both of those guys left a lot of questions in that first fight that I feel like can get answered in a rematch. Greg Hackett, he didn't look like he fought with a strategy. It didn't look like he fought with a game plan. A bunch of looping left, right hands. When he was unsuccessful on the inside, tried to fight on the back foot. It was ultimately unsuccessful at that also. I feel like if he had a game plan or a strategy, he would have did better. And that's why I'm interested to see them two go in there for a second time and just to see what type of adjustments Greg Hackett made. As far as Brian Norman Sr. go, he looked phenomenal in that fight. Say what you want about him personally, or as it pertains to his persona online, but he looked good for his age in there. I seen him stalking Greg at times, cutting the ring off on Greg at times, throwing great combinations at times. And we all know that he did that with an arm injury. So it'll be interesting to see if both of these guys got a full training camp, and was able to really lock in on each other. Now they got film to go back and study. So it'll be interesting to see, what type of game plan both of these guys can come up with after studying film on their first fight going into the second fight. Me, I would have to go Brian Norman Sr. Even with the arm injury, he looked real good in there. Like I said, combinations, cutting the ring off, and pushing Greg Hackett back. I assumed that Greg Hackett was the bigger guy in that fight. He looked a lot more husky than Brian Norman Sr. And he got youth on his side. He's not the youngest, but he's younger than Brian Norman Sr. So to me, that'll be an interesting fight for 2026. Give these guys both an opportunity to make a good amount of chicken, promote their social media presences, and, also, engage the fans. Boxing fans at least, we just want to see some good fights. We want to see guys get in there, go in there, have fun, lay it all on the line, and give us what we want, which is entertainment at the end of the day. Like I said before, I would have to go with Brian Norman Sr. in this fight. I could see him dropping Greg in this fight too. In that first fight, Greg was really defensively irresponsible. And who knows, Brian Norman Sr. could have not, capitalized on that because of that arm injury. So like I said before, with so many questions that, was left unanswered after that first fight that I think could get answered in a second fight. But that's a fight I'm interested in for, 2026. A great fight. I think it's better than watching those other YouTubers fight because these are guys who are connected in the sport of boxing, guys, who bring a lot of entertainment to the sport. And I don't see no difference with a rematch. Like I said, give these guys the opportunity to get paid, entertain fans, travel, and just enjoy themselves in the sport that they all love.